Dark clouds covered the South China Sea. Lightning flashed across the waves. In the midst of the storm, a radio crackled with a desperate call for help. Mayday! Mayday! Filipino fishing boat in distress! The message echoed across the disputed waters, tense with both natural and political danger. Nearby, vessels from many nations patrolled the region. The Philippine fishing boat, battered by fierce winds, was taking on water fast. Fear and urgency filled the air. Time was running out for the stranded sailors. Suddenly, the radar screens aboard a Chinese Coast Guard ship lit up. Officers sprang into action. Their mission: find and save the Filipino sailors before it was too late. The world watched as hope clashed with the storm. Would help arrive in time? The stage was set for a dramatic rescue that would test courage and international cooperation alike. The location was the contested waters of the South China Sea, a region fraught with tension and uncertainty, where international boundaries are constantly challenged and the presence of patrol vessels is a daily reminder of ongoing disputes. This area is notorious not only for its political volatility, but also for sudden storms and unpredictable tides that can turn calm waters into a nightmare within minutes. On this particular day, the weather was especially brutal, with thick, menacing clouds rolling in and the wind howling across the open sea. Huge waves crashed relentlessly against the hulls of every ship, and visibility dropped to near zero as fog and rain enveloped everything in a gray shroud. For Filipino fishermen, these treacherous waters are both home and workplace, a place where they have learned to read the signs of the sea and survive its many moods. But on this day, the familiar sea became a deadly trap, catching even the most experienced fishermen off guard. Their small wooden boat, built for endurance but not for such fury, struggled desperately against the overwhelming force of nature. Rain battered the deck with relentless force, and wind whipped the sails so violently that it threatened to tear them apart. As the storm intensified, the sailors clung to each other for support, their faces etched with fear, but also with determination. The sea tossed their boat high and low, each wave threatening to capsize them, each trough a dizzying plunge into chaos. Water flooded the lower cabin, forcing the crew to bail desperately, their hands moving in frantic rhythm against the rising tide. Radios sputtered and crackled as they tried again and again to send their distress signal, hoping someone, somewhere, would hear their call for help. All around them, darkness and danger closed in, the storm blotting out any sign of land or rescue, leaving them isolated in a world of roaring wind and water. It seemed as though the ocean itself was determined to swallow them whole, each wave rising higher, each moment more perilous than the last. But even in the face of overwhelming odds, the Filipino sailors refused to lose hope, drawing strength from each other and their unbreakable spirit, determined to survive the night and see the dawn. Inside the battered fishing boat, the men worked quickly, their faces etched with worry and determination. The relentless rain hammered down, soaking their clothes and chilling them to the bone. But there was no time to rest or even think about comfort. "Keep bailing water!" shouted their captain, his voice barely heard over the roaring storm. His words were sharp and urgent, cutting through the chaos as he tried to keep his crew focused and alive. With buckets and even bare hands, the crew tried to keep the boat afloat. Every second counted as water poured in faster than they could throw it out, their arms aching from the effort. Each man knew that if the boat sank, they would be at the mercy of the sea. The waves towered around them, threatening to swallow the small vessel whole. The radio was their last link to help, a fragile lifeline in the middle of the raging ocean. Static crackled through the speaker, but it was their only hope. Every few minutes, the captain called out their position, hoping someone would hear. His voice trembled with urgency, repeating their coordinates again and again, praying for a response. The rain made it hard to see more than a few meters away. The world outside the boat was a blur of gray, the horizon lost in sheets of water and wind. Hope flickered each time the radio crackled. The crew would pause, listening intently for any sign of a reply, their hearts pounding with anticipation and fear. The fear of sinking was stronger than the cold. Their bodies shook from exhaustion and the biting wind, but their minds clung to the thought of survival. Despite the danger, no one gave up. Each man pushed himself beyond his limits, driven by the will to see another sunrise and return home. "We have families waiting for us," one sailor whispered to another, his hands numb and trembling. The thought of loved ones gave them strength, even as the storm raged on. The men took turns on the lookout, straining their eyes for any sign of help. Every shadow on the horizon brought a surge of hope, only to fade into disappointment. It was a fight not just against the storm, but against despair. The endless wind and waves battered their spirits, but together they held on. They knew they might not survive the night if help did not come soon. Yet, as darkness fell and the storm howled louder, the crew clung to hope, refusing to let fear win. Farther out at sea, the Chinese Coast Guard monitored the radio waves. When the distress call came through, the crew sprang into action. Captain Lee, the officer in charge, gave quick orders. "Plot their location. Prepare for rescue. We move now." The ship's engines roared to life. Strong searchlights cut across the darkness. Speeding through choppy waves, the Chinese crew scanned the horizon for any sign of the Filipino boat. Every second counted. They faced danger too. The storm tossed their larger vessel from side to side. Waves crashed over the bow, soaking everyone on deck. Still, the Chinese Coast Guard never slowed down. They knew lives were at stake. The rescue ship pressed forward, determined to find the lost sailors. Their dedication turned a dangerous sea into a lifeline. A faint light flickered in the distance, barely visible through the darkness and the relentless storm. For hours, the sea had been unforgiving, with towering waves and howling winds battering everything in their path. Through the thick rain and swirling fog, the Chinese Coast Guard finally managed to spot the Filipino fishing boat. The vessel was battered and barely afloat, its hull dangerously low in the water, tossed about by the raging sea. Without hesitation, the Coast Guard crew sprang into action. They quickly launched a smaller rescue boat, braving the wild, churning waves and risking their own safety to reach the stranded fishermen. On the sinking boat, the Filipino sailors waved frantically, their voices barely audible over the roar of the storm as they shouted for help, desperate to be seen and saved. The Chinese rescuers shouted back, "Hold on, we're coming!" Their words were a lifeline, cutting through the chaos and giving hope to the stranded men. With ropes and life vests in hand, the rescuers reached the struggling fishermen. They tossed the life-saving equipment across the gap, urging the men to hold tight as the boats rocked violently. One by one, the fishermen were pulled aboard the rescue boat. They were shivering from cold and fear, their faces etched with exhaustion, but relief was clear in their eyes. The operation was tense, every second feeling like an eternity. Huge waves continued to crash against the small rescue boat, threatening to overturn it at any moment. The danger was far from over, but the rescuers worked together as a team, coordinating every move, pulling each sailor to safety with determination and skill, refusing to give in to the storm. Once all the sailors were accounted for and safely aboard, the rescue boat turned and sped back toward the larger Coast Guard ship, fighting the waves with every engine surge. Safe at last, the Filipino sailors collapsed onto the deck, overwhelmed with relief and gratitude. They had survived against all odds. The storm had finally passed, leaving the sea calm once more. But for those who survived, the memory of that terrifying night would stay with them forever, a reminder of both the sea's fury and the courage it can inspire. After the rescue, the Filipino sailors expressed deep gratitude. "We thought we were lost," said Mario Reyes, the boat's captain, "but then the Chinese Coast Guard came. They saved our lives. We are very thankful." Chinese Coast Guard Captain Lee also spoke to reporters. "Maritime safety has no borders," he said. "We saw people in danger, and it was our duty to help. The sea can be unforgiving. Today, we stand together as fellow sailors." Philippine officials echoed these sentiments. "We appreciate the swift actions of the Chinese Coast Guard," said an official from the Philippine embassy. "Their bravery and professionalism made all the difference." The rescue had brought together two groups who usually stood apart, united by a moment of shared humanity. News of the rescue spread quickly across the Philippines. Families wept tears of joy on hearing their loved ones were safe. Social media was flooded with messages of thanks. "Thank you, China, for saving our kababayans," wrote one user. The Philippine government made an official statement. "We sincerely thank the Chinese Coast Guard for their heroic efforts," it read. "Their timely response and compassion will not be forgotten." In Manila, some community groups sent letters of appreciation to the Chinese embassy. Local newspapers highlighted the story on their front pages. The message was clear. In the face of danger, kindness and bravery mattered more than differences. This open gratitude helped ease tensions, at least for a moment, between the two countries. Photographs taken during the rescue showed the raw emotion of the event. One image captured the Filipino sailors huddled on the deck, faces wet with both rain and tears. Another showed Chinese Coast Guard officers reaching out, risking their own safety to save lives. The media published these dramatic scenes. People around the world saw the courage of both the rescued and the rescuers. These images reminded everyone of the real risks faced by those who work at sea. A final photograph showed all the sailors together, wrapped in blankets, sharing a simple meal on the Coast Guard ship. There were smiles, handshakes, and quiet words of thanks. These pictures told the story in a way words could not, a story of bravery, hope, and unexpected friendship. This rescue was more than just a dramatic event at sea. It became a symbol of how old rivals could come together in a time of need. For a region often marked by tension, this act of kindness sparked new conversations. Diplomats in both Manila and Beijing noted the positive impact. "This rescue has shown that cooperation is possible, even in difficult times," said a Chinese spokesperson. Filipino leaders agreed, calling it a step toward understanding. People on both sides hoped the spirit of this rescue would guide future actions. "Let's remember this moment," said one Filipino journalist, "when we chose to help, not to fight." The rescue at sea may be over, but its message of compassion and courage will last long after the storm has passed.